Here is Yeats's idea. He won the 1923 Nobel Prize for Literature. He was an Irish poet and playwright and also statesman. He led the movement for Irish independence and actually served then in the Irish Parliament. He became a symbol, really, of the Irish nationalist movement. Here is Yeats as a young man. Here he is as an old man. And there he is in between. In any case, he has a number of themes that go throughout his poems. One of them is that civilization is weary. Civilization is nearing collapse. But nature abhors a vacuum, and so something is going to fill its place. Think about Eliot's image of just being faced with a heap of broken images, just fragments of a civilization that he's gathering up, and then he's going to try to reconstruct somehow. Yeats has no such ambition and no such optimism that could be done. Yeats's idea is, look, civilization goes through cycles, and it's nearing a cycle of collapse. Okay. And something new is going to arise, but it's probably going to be a long, confusing, ambiguous, and bloody process. We don't know what it will be. Something is going to move into the space of our current civilization, but we don't know what it is. He also expresses a kind of nostalgia for an earlier era, a nostalgia for civilization at its height, for a sense of eternity that would transcend this cyclic pattern of reconstruction and then destruction. Here is one of his most famous poems, The Second Coming. And really many of the great lines of 20th century literature, I think, are found in this poem. Notice it was written in 1920, just at the end of the First World War, just after. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Let's just take that part of the poem for a moment. What's your reaction to that? Yeah?
Fear.
Fear, yes. Okay, good. Turning and turning in the widening gyre. That has a bigger meaning for him that we'll talk about in a moment, but just think of the falcon. You're trying to control it. It's going further and further out of control. Can't hear you anymore. Things are falling apart. The center can't hold. Anarchy is loosed upon the world. Blood-dimmed tides. Okay, so it's one of fear. Things are falling apart, and there's no way for the falconer even to call the falcon back. There's nothing he can do. So we're in a bad situation where the worst are full of passionate intensity, the best lack all conviction, and the ceremonies of innocence are drowned. Okay? Think of events that might evoke this. I mean, he's thinking of the First World War. Are there other events you would point to and say, yeah, wow, here's a case of the worst being full of passionate intensity, mere anarchy loosed upon the world, blood-dimmed tide, things are falling apart.
Terrorism.
Terrorism, yeah. In fact, I read this poem to my kids on September 11th, 2001. That was my bedtime story. Read them this poem. I'm sure they slept great that night. But yeah, it seems to me that we see around us all the time in the world things that really reinforce this thought. Here's the falcon going out of control. Ah! Now here's his broader idea. When he uses this term gyre, he's thinking of cycles. And actually, here's the sort of picture he has in mind. He thinks of history as proceeding in roughly 2,000-year cycles. And one starts to decline while another starts to rise. He sees us as being in this sort of period right now between cycles. And he's afraid of what's coming. He realizes these are momentous times, highly dangerous times. So here's his basic idea. Roughly from 4000 to 2000 BC, that, at least starting around 3300, is the Bronze Age. So we get the rise of civilization, the advent of writing. The earliest writing we've ever found is actually an accounting book. There is the civilization in Sumeria, in Mesopotamia, in other words, in Persia, in early Egypt. Then 2000, for the next 2,000 years, you get the Iron Age. You get the rise of the Egypt of the pharaohs and the pyramids. China. You get India, the Rig Veda, the Upanishads. You get Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then in what has often been called the Axial period, around 600 BC, you get all at once, really, around the world, Confucius and Lao Tzu in China. You get the Buddha in India. You get Hebrew scriptures being written down in a comprehensive way for the first time. You get the earliest stages of Greek philosophy, Thales and others. You get the beginnings of Greek theater and Greek history. So all of that is taking place roughly contemporaneously around 600 BC. But you get all of those developments. So civilization actually becoming a kind of continuous culture. And here are some examples of that from Egypt, India, China. Oh, an awesome statue of Buddha. That's Homer. That is people carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And there, of course, the Parthenon. Now then, for the last 2,000 years, well, the rise of the nation state, the Roman Empire, Christianity, a continuous written culture, the development of advanced technologies. But now, 2,000 to 4,000, what? Well, we're not sure. We don't know what's going to rise. There's one vision, okay? The poem continues. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of the Spiritus Mundi, the world spirit, troubles my sight somewhere in the sands of the desert. A shape with lion body and the head of a man. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The image in the background here seems to be the Sphinx, an image of the earliest stages of Egypt, really right around 2000 BC, let's say, before the pyramids, before the pharaohs, this earlier stage, which was the one of the last times that this kind of transition was going on. So here are some photographs of it from the Library of Congress, where the pyramids have not been moved. The poem concludes that darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born? Well, he sees civilization, as I've said, is collapsing, but with civilization's collapse goes what else? Well, everything in a way, right? And in particular, like what? Yeah.
I don't know how to answer that, but I had a question.
Okay.
Slash for Bethlehem to be born, is that it's like the Antichrist, like the head of a man, body of a lion?
Yes. Yes, good. It is, it's Christianity that he sees as slipping from the scene. And what did Christianity bring with it? Well, something that actually tamed this rough beast. A certain set of values, right? A rocking cradle. Something that had a set of values that actually organized and structured civilization and made it possible to hold back the blood-dimmed tides. But now that it's fading away, he thinks that not only it, but those values are receding. And so now we're in deep trouble because something is now arising, and in his image here, slouching, moving slowly toward Bethlehem to be born, to give a kind of structure to this next 2,000-year period. One way to look at this is, in the language of this course, the norms that we've organized civilization around for 2,000 years are dying. And a new set of norms is going to take their place. There are going to be new patterns of life, a new structure to civilization. What will it be like? And it's a question mark. He doesn't have a theory of that. He just raises the question. He sees all of this is falling apart, and he doesn't know what's going to take its place. Very quickly at the end, here's another famous poem of his, Sailing to Byzantium, 1928. So a few years later. That's no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel-crowded seas. So he's describing what? Youth, vibrancy, sexuality, fertility, all of this, the sensual music. But amidst all that, everybody is neglecting the monuments of an aging intellect. And so he's reminding people, look, there are certain things that are eternal. Maybe there are certain things that are going to survive. So this poem is a little more optimistic. Maybe there's something that actually survives the loss of a civilization. There he is sailing to Byzantium. Now, what is it? Well, Byzantium becomes the image of that. He's referring to Byzantine civilization, a civilization that is sort of remote in time and space, one that few people know much about, one that is gone. But nevertheless, he says, there is something maybe that we can learn from it. An aged man is but a paltry thing, coat upon a stick. But unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing for every tatter in its mortal dress. Nor is there singing in school but studying the monuments of its own magnificence. So I had planned to talk about singing schools. I won't do that, but there is such a thing as singing schools that he's referring to, where people were taught to sing stuff. And then he basically says, gather me into the artifice of eternity. So he's saying, look, some things, some monuments actually survive the collapse of a civilization. I want to be one of those monuments. Maybe my job is to create monuments that people can look back to and identify with, even once that civilization has fallen apart. And so that's his hope, that he can stand eternally, even though the world is passing to come. The world changes, but maybe there are monuments that we can construct that will survive.